good evening and welcome to the Graduate School of Education and Psychology Margaret J. Weber Distinguished Lecture Series. I'm Vanessa John, I'm the Cultural Attaché, and it is my honor to welcome you here this evening. To those of you on Zoom, just a gentle reminder, if you will keep your microphones muted to cut down on background noise, and know that this session is being recorded and will be posted on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So in 2014, the Margaret J. Weber Distinguished Lecture Series was established through an endowment gift by alumni and friends to honor Dean Emeritus Margaret J. Weber. The series' mission is to foster academic excellence, social purpose, meaningful service, and personal fulfillment. Our theme for this year is Beyond Inclusion, Removing Barriers to Create Belonging. And we have invited our speaker here tonight to inform, to challenge, and to encourage you. And while the series is titled a lecture, we do want to invite you into dialogue with us. So during our Q&A portion, we will invite you to ask your questions. And those of you that are joining us on Zoom, we hope you'll participate as well. Before I welcome our speaker, there are a couple guests in the room that I'd like to take a moment to introduce. First is Gabriela Miramontes. She is our assistant clinical professor and the director of our education division. She is the director of our Center for Global Partnerships and Learning, which is collaborating with us tonight on this lecture. So thank you, Gabby, and your team. With her from the center are Dr. Maria Brahma. Joining us will be Sonia Sharifi-Fard and Suellen Schneider Di Maria. Thank you, ladies. Also with us this evening via Zoom is Dr. Robert DeMayo. He is our Associate Dean of Psychology. And we have Dr. Lonnie McNamee, Assistant Dean of Faculty Development and Administration, and the Executive Director of our Urban Initiative, as well as Dr. Stephanie Wu, who is representing our online programs as the Assistant Dean. As someone from our online programs, we're thankful that you are here in person with us today. And also with us from our Board of Visitors is Dr. Fareshte Amin. So welcome, Dr. Amin. And finally, our Interim Dean of the Graduate School of Education and Psychology, Dr. Farzeen Majidi. Welcome, everyone. He brought his own crowd. All right. So it's an honor to welcome via Zoom the namesake of our speaker series and GSEP Dean Emeritus, Dr. Margaret J. Weber. Dr. Weber, thank you. Would you lead us in prayer as we begin our discussion this evening?
Yes, thank you, Vanessa. It's good to be here. Please join me in prayer. Dear Lord God, we give thanks for this lecture and our speaker this evening. Help us honor others in ways that grant them the grace of their individuality. Help us realize our own uniqueness to share our strength with others. Help us with forgiveness of ourselves and others. Help our hearts expand through loving others. Lord God, we are grateful to get to learn in this special way. Help us listen to model ways to care for each other. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Weber, and thank you. What an honor it is to have you at your own lectureship this evening. So tonight, our keynote lecture will take us on a brief but deep dive into the ongoing evolution of women's roles in society. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Carmen Estrada-Shea, a lifelong activist in community development and an accomplished educator. She was recently appointed by the President of the United States, Joe Biden, to the prestigious Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board. The Fulbright's program is to promote mutual understanding through exchange diplomacy. The program is administered by the State Department's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs and is one of the most prestigious scholarships in the world. Dr. Shea is a beloved Pepperdine alumna. She earned a doctorate in institutional management from GSEP and has worked at numerous academic institutions and leadership roles such as academic dean, diversity, gender equity, and Title IX compliance director, as well as professor. She takes community engagement seriously, and in addition to serving at the pleasure of the president, Dr. Shea continues to be active at the local level. She has served as LA County Supervisor Janice Hahn's appointee to the Women and Girls Initiative Governing Board, and currently serves as Hahn's appointee to the County Small Business Commission. Dr. Shea has long supported civic engagement, serving with the National Political Caucus, Women's Political Caucus, for nearly 30 years as the national first vice president of diversity, president of the California South Bay Caucus, and vice president of education and training. She has helped many women get elected to public office. So please join me in welcoming this accomplished and civic-minded woman, Dr. Carmen Estrada Shea.
Thank you so much, and welcome students, faculty, and staff of Pepperdine University. As you know, I'm truly honored to be the distinguished lecturer for the Margaret J. Weber Distinguished Lecture Series. I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Weber, and I know of her research and her work on work-life balance, which was truly trailblazing. And we need more research on work-life balance. It is so important for women and women's studies. I am a member of the Fulbright Scholarship Board and a member of the United States State Department, a representative diplomat. I don't want to spend too much time on myself, but I will briefly tell you a little bit about my story so you know why you are listening to me here today. I was born in West Hollywood. Yes, truly, I was born in West Hollywood. All right. And I was raised by my mother and father and graduated from Hollywood High School. Go Sheiks. Okay. That's really an honor because at that time I went to school with some very famous people that became very famous actors. The values most important to my family growing up were always hard work, no excuses, getting the task done, strong ethics. My father and mother always taught me that women could do anything they put their minds to. My father was a teacher and my mother was a bookkeeper. My parents were strong, educated, and independent people. This was unique for the time. Women were raised to pursue careers in elementary school teaching. Everybody remembers that. Some of the younger people don't, but we were. Social work and nursing. And that was pretty much it. It was not until the late 80s that the STEM opportunities were really discussed for women. I was a little before that time, and so it was still a struggle to feel justified in one's own ambition. And the younger women I know don't necessarily have had to go through that trouble, but they are contemporarily meeting that through the imposter syndrome, and we will talk a little bit about that later. However, my mother and father and the community around me encouraged me to dream big. And so it was those values and inspirations that led me to seek education and a career focused in community engagement. I received my Bachelor of Arts cum laude and 2 master's degrees from California State Northridge. I then went on to earn a doctorate in institutional management from Pepperdine. Go Waves. My career as an educator has spread across 3 decades as a university professor, academic administrator. I was assistant professor in history, diversity and women's studies, and ethnic studies. And of course, I was a college dean, directory of diversity, gender equity, and Title IX compliance. Yes, I was dean of athletics. And I actually was one of the first women that served on the South Coast Conference Commission. So again, I feel that I had the opportunity to be breaking some of the barriers in which women really did not. What were very interesting experiences because you're not necessarily received in a positive way, especially by your male counterparts. I created resource centers for women and underserved students to increase their access to transformational information and leadership. After my time as an educator, I turned my energy towards service and philanthropy. I received the California State Senate Woman of Distinction Award that recognizes women for their impact on their communities. I'm also the recipient of the Rosa Parks Wall of Tolerance Award, and my name is inscribed on the monument honoring my work against injustice and intolerance. I have a certificate signed by the Honorable Rosa Parks. And why am I telling you this? Because Pepperdine needs to know that they produce quality alums, and I am one of you. So thank you very much. And you, as the students that are here, are going to be looking to great things that you're going to do with the education you have from our institution. In November, I was the President of the United States appointed me to the Fulbright Scholarship Board. And I am one of 12 board members from across the United States. And interestingly enough, I replaced Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Know her? Okay. Okay. Who was elected in November as the governor of Arkansas. So I replaced somebody that, interestingly enough, went on to be an elected governor of a state. As a board member, I make policy for the Fulbright program and review research projects for Fulbright U.S. scholars, Hubert Humphrey Fellows, and Western Hemisphere foreign scholars. Fulbright is recognized as a force for peace. And again, Pepperdine gave me the tools to teach and understand peace. I truly say that this is a great honor and a great accomplishment. Now, what is the Fulbright program? And why is Fulbright so important? In 1945, J. William Fulbright was serving as the first-term U.S. Senator, and the world was emerging from World War II. Just after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, many realized the horrors of the atomic age. Senator Fulbright's passion became fostering a sound foreign policy for the post-war world. He strongly believed in foreign policy founded on cooperation amongst nations. He was convinced that education and diplomacy would be invaluable tools for creating fuller foreign policy. A month after the war ended, he submitted a bill to establish a program designed to produce open-minded scholars willing to cooperate in constructive activities rather than compete in mindless contests of mutual destruction. Eventually, policymakers would maintain peace in the world. His vision became a reality when President Harry Truman signed the Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Program into law. The Fulbright Board was created in 1947 to decide which students' international institutions were qualified to participate. And to insulate the scholarships from politics, members of the Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board are presidentially appointed and chosen from private rather than public life. Board members are known leaders in their fields. Once a country signs a Fulbright agreement with the United States, a binational commission is created to create how program will operate in a host country. You might think that Fulbright programs favor only scholars from traditional academic disciplines such as English, physics, economics, engineering. The program does serve all those disciplines, but it also has sought, since its creation, to recruit talent individuals from disciplines and not just from university campuses. In 1968, for example, Ronald Ralphford received a Fulbright Arts grant to study flamenco guitar with Spanish masters Diego de Gastor and Paco de Lucia. Eleanor King, the director of dance program at the University of Arkansas, received 2 Fulbright scholarships in the 60s to research dance in Japan. And the great American playwright, Edward Albee, and author, John Updike, and soprano, Renee Fleming, have all been awarded Fulbrights. In the 75 years, the Fulbright program has become the foremost, most prestigious international program, reaching over 160 countries on 6 continents. Each year, 2,000 US students and 800 US scholars receive Fulbright awards, as do 4,000 foreign students and 900 foreign scholars. 62 Fulbright alumni have gone on to win Nobel Prizes. We're in good company. Okay, 75 have become MacArthur Foundation Fellows, 89 have won Pulitzer Prizes, and 39 have become heads of state. And I can tell you that as I read these research projects, I never know who's going to be the next Nobel Prize winner that comes from a research project that they have submitted and that I'm reading. It's really a haunting and wonderful feeling to know that you are participating in the future of our world. If you're interested in a unique research experience, I encourage you to apply for a Fulbright foreign scholarship grant. Pepperdine has a program, and please check with your advisor of how you can. And as I tell anybody, don't select yourself out, let them select you out. So apply. If you don't get in the first time, apply again, okay? And apply, apply, apply. It's an incredible opportunity, and you're in great company. It's really a pleasure to conduct this conversation on the changing role of women in contemporary society. And we shall start with a brief history of the women's movement in the United States and the accomplishments of the pioneers in the US women's movement through women's suffrage. Then we shall analyze the accomplishments of the past 80 years and what has happened and where are we headed. We shall talk of progress, a few steps forward and major steps back, the impact on women's economics, and looking to the future. So I also want to say that the slideshow will be running through the conversation, and it is not tracked to this conversation, but it provides for you an opportunity to get some snippets of some of the history and some of the contributions of some of these great pioneers. The role of women in the past. Throughout time, women around the world have held many roles in society. Multitasking has been a skill that I think women are born with. And so women have had to take on roles as warriors, caretakers, healers, physicians, pharmacists, nurses, midwives, educators, gynecologists, counselors, ministers, etc. There are countless examples of women in history around the world taking on pivotal roles in medicine, education, science. And yet today, we're still struggling to lower the gender gap, the STEM gap, to obtain equal pay and safe and affordable access to housing, healthcare, childcare. Women are still struggling in the United States to be safe. Why is this? And what part did culture play in the curtailment of women's rights? American women were always pioneers, but their rights were curtailed by English common law. During the American Revolutionary War, many women were steadfast on liberty with men. Women performed crucial tasks during the war only to find the new country's constitution only addressed the rights of men. The document, which granted freedom from English sovereignty, transcended and abbreviated English common law. These laws have lasted to early modern period, and under English law and later American law, women were not granted the legal privilege of exercising such things as property rights. British institutions of primogeniture, dowry, coverture, which is being under a man's protection, and widowhood, they governed the suppression of women's rights. Aristocratic women, of course, found themselves with ways around them through creating vehicles and restrictions in the form of separate estates, jointure agreements, and other methods. With the settlement of the British colony of Virginia, it was expected that the patriarchal common law would rule colonial society. The post-independence American society became more and more patriarchal and gendered. Some of the US Constitution was inspired by the Iroquois and the Delaware Confederation. Jefferson, Franklin, John Adams, and James Adams patterned the native model in the US Constitution. But one thing, they left women out. And it's very interesting because in the Iroquois Confederation, it is the women that vote the chiefs in, only the women. So, but they took the model and they eliminated the women and only had the men. So it's very important for us to understand that patriarchy has been engendered in our historical period. And that is one of the reasons of why we are here today. And so the US Constitution used the native model, but omitted the female gender in its citizenry, creating cultural barriers to gender equity that we still face today. Of the women's right to vote. Interestingly enough, women's right to vote and questions about why women were voting were probably as early as the late 1700s and into the 1800s, the early 1800s. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, writer, philosopher, and activist, abolitionist, feminist, and visionary, held the first women's right to vote convention in Seneca Falls, New York. The convention was attended by the African-American abolitionist leader, Frederick Douglass. The convention produced a document called the Declaration of Sentiments, patterned after the Constitution, and challenging the patriarchy and the elements of the patriarchy that were oppressing women, including lack of property, lack of vote, and of course, husbandry, and unequal access to sexuality, which was quite revolutionary for its time. The convention, every year after that, women pushed for reform and for the right to vote to be added into the Constitution. In 1851, Susan B. Anthony partnered and formed the women's rights movement. During the Civil War, they joined the South Carolina abolitionists, the Grimke sisters, in the anti-slavery movement. Black Northern women were welcomed and participated in the anti-slavery movement and the early women's rights movement. In 1866, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the first woman to run for Congress, although she could not vote. In 1868, Stanton, Mott, and Susan B. Anthony formed the Women's Equal Rights Movement. And in 1869, African-American men and enslaved African men were given the right to vote, which was interesting because African women were not given the right to vote. In the late 1800s, Black women were marginalized by the women's movement. Stanton thought that why should Black men be given the right to vote when white women could not vote? White women primarily advocated for white middle class religiosity, Protestantism, and property, and good education. Stanton believed that white women, like herself, were more deserving of rights of other people. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton, An American Life, you can read her biography if you want, by Laurie Ginsburg. This began the racial separation with the women's movement. Black and white women ran parallel women's movements. Later, other women of color, Native Americans, Asians, were also excluded from the women's movement. Parallel movements began, which served a segregated America. White women distanced themselves from the Black women and other women of color. The first woman elected to Congress in 1916, 4 years before women secured the right to vote, Jeannette Rankin, a Republican from Montana, became the first woman elected to Congress. Rankin was a tireless activist who worked to expand the rights for women, to ensure safe working conditions, improve health care for women and children, and Rankin enjoined what was their burgeoning was the temperance movement. Rankin is still the only woman from the state of Montana to be elected to Congress in history. So that is over 100 years ago, and Montana has only had one woman. The progressive era in the 1890s brought the beginning of the progressive era. This was a period of social activism and political reform. The progressive era ended with World War I. At the conclusion of the progressive era, the women-led temperance movement, which was really a very successful movement, won the Prohibition Act of 1919. The 18th Amendment outlawed the manufacture and sale of alcohol. The progressive era concluded with the passage of the 19th Amendment, led by Susan B. Anthony, white women throughout the United States won the right to vote. Now, what's very interesting is because white women won the right to vote, but Black women and other Native American women still did not have the right to vote. So it's very interesting. So we run a parallel America. And as we're seeing today, we're still running a parallel America. The role of women's clubs. The women's clubs were part of the outcome of social reform of the progressive movement. The women's clubs provided an opportunity for women before they could vote to focus on welfare of their community. It was called municipal housekeeping. And of course, they had to put housekeeping into the word, because remember, that's what women did, right? Housekeeping. Women had a responsibility to transform public policy. The first phase was started by white Protestant white women. The second phase was led by African-American women. The women's club started tackling such moral issues as women's suffering, lynchings, kindergarten, okay, family planning, abortion, and methods of birth control, things that men couldn't come to listen about. And of course, because these were very, very exclusive clubs for women. But it provided a hub for women to be able to come and discuss subjects that were basically, they were not part of the participation of the political process. The women's clubs were training ground for women who wanted to become politically active. Two women that we know that were very successful were Mary Harriman and Eleanor Roosevelt, who founded what is known as the Junior League. And I don't know if any of you know, Junior League at one time was a very exclusive organization for women, young women, okay? And besides teaching the appropriate decor for setting tables and doing receptions, etc., the Junior League also prepared women actively to take on issues. In 1901, in New York City, Mrs. Harriman was the heiress to New York's Central Railroad, and Eleanor Roosevelt, well, she's made history for over 100 years, and we still are living with Eleanor Roosevelt's legacy. They both advocated for the settlement movement and immigrant rights. Eleanor Roosevelt chaired the United Nations Committee and went on to write the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Significant because we are still referring to that document. When we talk about Ukraine, we're talking about the Declaration of Human Rights that was authored by Eleanor Roosevelt. So very interesting that, again, everything goes back to these women that were extremely active and sensitive to the needs of the community, no matter where they were on the socio-economic level. In the 1920s, while white American women secured the right to vote, many American women of color still faced barriers and discrimination. This discrimination led to violence intended to discourage women of color from voting. We must acknowledge that there were two women liberation movements, the white women's movement and the women of color's movements. Some historians still conclude that the current women's movement serves the goal of white feminism and disenfranchises women of color. That is, of course, up for debate, but regardless, the question has to be raised, and what do we have to do? We have to make change. The intentions and the goals of these movements are the same, but we must recognize the privileges that accompany the first and the systemic barriers that come with the latter. Although white women secured voting rights in 1920, it was not until 1965 that women of color were granted full right to vote in the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which is now still even again under challenge. Native American women faced systemic barriers in the face of political participation and getting votes counted. Women of color were fighting two battles, sexism and racism. And in 1975, the Extension Voting Rights Act was a key movement in the history of Latino voting rights. And I had an opportunity to work with Bert Corona, who was a leader in this movement. through the Mexican American Democratic Clubs and LULAC and the GI Forum. Before this was passed, the ability to read and write English served as a barrier to prevent people of color. Hispanics were very vulnerable to this because some were bilingual, and therefore, even if they were American citizens, they were prevented from voting. So again, certainly in places like Texas that were extremely racist. So this gave the extension of the Voting Rights Act, gave the right to vote to everyone, regardless of their literacy or their English competency. Alice Paul, the Equal Rights Movement. Okay, the ERA movement and amendment, everybody's heard of the ERA, correct? Equal Rights Amendment. Okay, well, it's not a recent. It was written by a woman by the name of Alice Paul, who was a suffragette. She was a Quaker and a devout feminist. She was a foremost strategist for the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote, and she became a leader in the National Women's Party. Alice Paul and Crystal Lee wrote the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment secured constitutional equality for women. Alice Paul won a major permanent success with the inclusion of women as a group protected against discrimination by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That was a major win. The Equal Rights Amendment is designed to guarantee equal rights for all Americans, regardless of sex. Proponents assert it would end the illegal distinctions between men and women in matters of divorce, property, employment, and other matters. The first version of the ERA was written by Alice Paul and introduced to Congress in December of 1923. What year is it now? 2023. 100 years. And we still have not have the Equal Rights Amendment. African Americans have equal rights, at least on paper they do, but the Equal Rights Amendment for women has not been passed. 100 years. So Virginia we're 3 states short of passing the equal rights because it has to have ratification. And the ratification has to have 38 of the 50 states need to ratify. And Virginia was the last state to ratify, leaving only 3 states shy of the necessary 38. And it's very interesting, as we got closer to the 38 states, other states pulled out. So it's very interesting, see how women have always been. Now, what's very interesting is what? We are 50% of the population, correct? All right, so you think that we should have equal rights on paper, okay, as an amendment to the Constitution. Okay, mid-20th century feminism. In the 1960s, the women's movement in the US witnessed broad economic social change. The emergence of women's movement of the 1960s and the 1970s was significantly related to the availability of the birth control pill and the control over women's fertility that it enabled. The capability allowed women to make choices about other arenas, especially work and sexual freedom, coupled by Betty Friedan's 1963 book called The Feminine Mystique. This gave voice to millions of American women's frustrations with their limited gender roles and helped spark widespread public activism for gender equality. It changed the attitudes about marriage and about the happily ever after attitude about male and female sexual relations. Now, those of you that are younger don't really have that or don't grow up in that myth, but certainly those of us that are older, it was part of our fairy tales. And if you really even look at the fairy tales, right, they kind of perpetuate that, the princess, the prince, and all that story. Influenced by the civil rights movement during the 1960s, the women's movement inspired the development of a wide array of organizations and lobbying groups that urged for full equality of American women. Shirley Chisholm, an African-American woman, was the first Black woman in 1968 to be elected to the New York State Assembly. In 1968, she became also elected to Congress. Then in 1972, She became the first Black woman to seek the presidency of the United States. That was so daring at the time. She pushed for laws of the United States that helped women, children, students, those dealing with financial instability and financial aid for going to higher education, and others and farm workers, Native Americans, and others who were being ignored in the political process. She fought for access to quality health care, a great proponent, long before Barack Obama, long before Hillary Clinton. Shirley Chisholm fought for health care, and from the state of New York. She spoke up for military veterans. She spoke out against the Vietnam War. Shirley Chisholm's bid for the presidency was undermined. By whom? Who do you think undermined her bid for the presidency? Men? Okay, guess again. Remember, she's African American. White women. And therefore, she was basically sidelined, and Phyllis Schlafly was the main culprit in sidelining her. White women thought that they should partner with white men in order to get what they want, as opposed to having an advocate. So again, like I say, we have been segregated, and women of color have had to go through other means and had to create their own power strategies. Advocacy political organizations. The National Women's Political Caucus was founded on July 10th, 1971, to increase the number of women in all aspects of political life. As elected, appointed officials, as judges, state and federal courts, delegates to the national conventions. Unheard of at the time. On that date, 320 women from all over the United States met in Washington, D.C. to found NWPC. The founders included Bella Abzug, who was a front-runner in environmental rights. Shirley Chisholm, we just spoke about. Betty Friedan, who wrote the Feminine Mystique, and the infamous Gloria Steinem, among others. The founders elected a National Policy Council, initially co-chaired by Bella Abzug, and a Republican woman by the name of Virginia Allen, who was the former chair of President Richard Nixon, a Republican, task force on women's rights and responsibilities. At the founding meeting, Steinem delivered an address to the women of America in which she's characterized feminism not just as a movement, but a revolution. And this meant striving for a society free of racism, sexism. The speech delivered at the height of the women's movement became a milestone in US female oratory. And that kicked off a series of people that became known and are byproducts of the women's movement. So we started to see more women being appointed to positions of power that were never seen before. For example, the first female US treasurer was Ramona Bañuelos from Gardena. Ramona Bañuelos is a Mexican woman, and actually she had a restaurant. She with $300 right around World War II, she bought a tortilla making machine, and she established a tortilla. She started selling tortillas, and then she opened a restaurant. Ramona Bañuelos was a very shrewd woman, and she was founder of the Pan American Bank. She became the first female Latina appointed by Richard Nixon, a Republican, as the United States Treasurer. Roe versus Wade. In 1973, marked the passing of Roe versus Wade, a landmark decision of US Supreme Court in which the court ruled the Constitution generally protects a pregnant woman's liberty to choose to have an abortion. In Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court decided that the right to privacy implied in the 14th Amendment, going back to 14th, 15th, and 16th Amendment, protected abortion as a fundamental right. It protected a woman's right to choose. the government did retain the power to regulate and restrict abortion access depending on the state of the pregnancy. Now, what's very interesting, there's always been a lot of hot debate about this and why, and is it moral and all this. Well, our country was founded on what? Separation of church and state, okay? And so therefore, it is what? A woman's decision. You would hope you make the decision that's correct for that particular person. But people have left out that there are some tragedies that have happened, such as rape and incest, okay? People in the family that are really tragic situations and would really traumatize women. So no one really discussed that. And that's why this has become a very, very hot topic issue. Now, this is very much because as of June of 2022, Roe versus Wade, after 50 years, was overturned. Okay. So women run politics and policies. Although women currently only make 29% of Congress, women have been fighting for their place at the table for years and have taken steps forward and backwards when it comes to securing political leadership positions and passing critical policies. The first woman appointed to the Supreme Court in 1981 was Sandra Day O'Connor, again, appointed by President Ronald Reagan, okay, a Republican. So you see, it's kind of interesting, right? That we have kind of always made the assumption that anything that had to deal with women's liberation, women's movement was more of the Democratic, right, and the liberal party. But some of these Republicans really stepped up to the plate and saw the talent that was there and were really unbiased gender-wise. The first vice presidential Democrat Party nominee, Geraldine Ferraro, okay, was an American politician and an attorney. She served in Congress and she was the first Democratic vice presidential nominee in 1984. She ran alongside Walter Mondale, and this made her representing the first woman representing a major American political party in a national election. And that's significant because no one ever thought that women would get there, except whom? The original pioneers, Caddy Stanton, right, etc. In 1986, a milestone decision was made by Meritor versus Vinson, and it is sexual harassment was established as illegal and discriminatory. Now, this is major because before that, there was no policy, and there was nothing about sexual harassment. In fact, it was kind of like a hunting ground. And many people felt that when they came to work in different organizations, or actually even went to school in colleges and universities, that they were targets of sexual harassment and really had no say. There was no policy, there was no recourse. In 1993, we had the Family Medical Leave Act, which guarantees new parents to retain their job for 12 weeks after the birth of a child. Now, of course, this is unpaid leave, and it's the only form of paternal leave protected by law in the United States. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. In 1994, we had Gender Equity Education Act, and Congress adopts gender equity education to train teachers in gender equity, promote math and science to girls, and counsel pregnant teens and prevent sexual harassment. And in 1994, we had the Violence Against Women Act. We had the state-supported military institute could not deny or refuse entry to a woman in Virginia Military Academy. The first woman Secretary of State. We didn't have a woman Secretary of State till 1997, and that was, anybody remember? Madeleine Albright, okay? She is the first woman in this position, and she was a Clinton appointee. The first Black woman Secretary of State in 2005 was Condoleezza Rice. She was a Republican, okay? And she was appointed by George Bush. So the first female Speaker of the House in 2007, who is she? Nancy Pelosi, okay? A Democrat. The first Latina Secretary of Labor in 2009 was appointed, anybody know? Supervisor Hilda Solis, and she was appointed by Obama. And she was the first Latina Secretary of Labor. In 2009, we also achieved the Lilly Ledbetter Pay Act, which was a way of trying to get equal pay for equal work. And basically it meant that women could sue if they had been discriminated against in pay, but not from the time of their last paycheck, but from the very first day they were engaged in the employment. And so that would certainly make companies more accountable. And that's at 2009. The first Latina female Supreme Court justice, anybody know? Sonia Sotomayor, okay? She is the third woman to serve as a U.S. Supreme Court justice. Ban on the removal of women in combat in 2013. And you would wonder, why would you want to ban women from being in combat? Because again, it's a gendered attitude, right? Women join the military and women fight. They are not just nurses and support staff, right? They fight. Many women can shoot a rifle better than any man, okay? And just ask some of the police officers around, okay? The Violence Against Women Act in 2013 reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act, and this bill extended coverage to women of Native American tribal lands who are attacked by non-tribal residents, as well as lesbians and immigrants. And by the way, missing and murdered women on tribal lands is numerous. Hundreds go missing every day, and we do not hear of them every year. Excuse me, not every day, every year, hundreds. And I did a symposium on missing and murdered women of color, and we had Deb Holland on it because she is Native American. And basically, we were able to get the understanding of why this is such a big thing. One of them is that sovereignty from tribal lands prevents the FBI from going in and investigating. The other thing is it's not sexy. The media does not believe that women of color are as sexy as white women. So therefore, young white women, because a lot of white older women go missing and nobody knows about them either. So, so that is a major accomplishment. The first woman to lead a presidential nomination was whom? Hillary Clinton, okay? And she secured the presidential nomination for the Democratic Party, becoming the first US woman to lead the ticket of a major party. Now remember, we had what? In 1854, okay, the women's rights movement, right? And the political party. And we have now a woman running 100 years later, over 100 years later, okay? I mean, that's incredible. The first Women's March in 2017 was a worldwide protest, and it happened following Donald Trump's presidential inauguration. It was the largest single-day protest in US history, with the estimated 4 million participating in local marches across the nation. The organizers' goal for the march was send a bold message of our administration the first day in office and the world that women's rights are human rights. And Los Angeles' Women's March held in downtown Los Angeles, hosted 800,000 women. They only expected a few thousand, and they didn't realize that they would have 800,000 women in Los Angeles. The first woman vice president of the United States, 2020, Kamala Harris. And she is the first African-American and Southeast Asian American to be, so she is cultural individual, and she's the first woman in this office. And she seemed to say, I may be the first woman in this office, but I won't be the last. And then the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act of 2020. This bill addresses the response of the Department of Defense to sex-related offenses committed against members of the armed forces, including allowing a member to confidentially allege a complaint of sexual harassment to an individual outside the immediate chain of command of that member, that is the perpetrator. It moves the prosecutorial cases into civilian court. And it just is short of having it being investigated by the Department of Justice. This is major because since, I don't know, most of you don't remember, but tailhook was a big, in the 80s, in the late 80s and 90s, about all these women that were sexually harassed, women that are giving up their, their life for their country, and they are victims of sexual harassment. They complained and they could not get any justice because what happens? Everything goes what? Swept under the rug because it's men and a military tribunal hushes it up. I Am Vanessa Guillen was a private at Fort Hood. Now, Fort Hood is notorious in Texas for tremendous indiscretions of all kinds. Vanessa Guillen went missing. She was a private, she was young, she was 20, 21, and no one, her family are from Texas, and they don't even speak English, okay? And they basically raised a fuss. They used their congressperson, Sylvia Garcia, who basically got Vanessa Guillen's parents' mother, who doesn't speak English, in front of Donald Trump, in an audience in front of Donald Trump. And the tape is hilarious because Donald Trump, you know what his attitude about the border was and about immigrant and xenophobia and everything. She couldn't speak English and she's telling him there in Spanish that she wants answers about where her daughter, why she disappeared. Okay, but because of her, and actually a documentary filmmaker called Amy Zierling, she was able to raise the issue and was able to get the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act, which was signed into Congress in January 2020. It was one of the first acts that President Biden signed. Again, making sure that women are protected, something significant. We have more and more women going into the military. They should be protected. And Vanessa Guillen, they finally found Vanessa Guillen's body. They did find, but they also found that all of this had been covered up. And many other things had been covered up at Fort Hood and many military bases throughout the country. And again, when I did the symposium on missing and murdered women, Vanessa Guillen is one of those women. Looking backwards, where are we as women in 1840, since 1848? Now we shall shift into the present day, and we can take a moment to acknowledge that we stand here today on the shoulders and the accomplishments of those who came before us. And we must continue to fight as Jeanette Rankin did, and so many others fought for equal rights in the workplace, reducing the gender pay gap, increasing access to quality health care for women and children. We must continue to fight because we still have not won. The gender pay gap remains. Young women continue to experience barriers entering into STEM and STEAM fields. Instead of encouragement, access to quality education and healthcare for all women has been yet to be achieved. This is another space where the fight becomes two different fights, one for white women and whose privilege increases access to quality healthcare, education, and women of color are more racially face barriers. Although infant mortality rates continue to decrease globally, interestingly enough, and there hasn't been enough research done, American Black infants are observed to have about 2.1 times the infant mortality of white infants. We do not know why. At least there hasn't been documentation of that. Black infants are also 3.8 times more likely to die from low birth complications. And Black mothers are more likely than white mothers to receive late or no prenatal care. Again, remember I talked about the women in the 1800s? What were they talking about? Access to health care, family planning, right? Has anything changed? Only in certain groups. Now, some of the things that we need to keep looked at. The World Economic Forum, it's part of the UN index, has a gender gap index. As of 2022, the United States is ranked 30th of 156 applicable countries in the gender equality. In 2022, the country that's offering most gender conditions, favorable conditions and equality was Iceland. That's very interesting because we are what? The richest and certainly the most powerful country militarily. Why is this? Why are we in 30th place, right? We should be in there in the top 5, correct? You would think. How many of you knew that? That in the world standing? Interesting. The US is yet to have a female president. Again, we're the wealthiest country in the world, yet other first, second, and third world countries have had female prime ministers and heads of states. The United States still has not had a female United States. We came close, but we do not have a woman president yet. Numbers of women in national leadership. Okay, as of March 7th, 2023, there are 128 women in the United States House of Representatives. That is 29% of a House of Representatives, not including the 4 non-voting delegates. More women occupy the lower chamber of the House, and 25 women serve in the Senate, which is 25% of the Senate. So therefore, again, we're still what? In the lower quartile. How many women are, what is the percentage of women in the United States? 50. We should be what? 50%, right? It should be close to 50% in the House, and it should be what? How many in the Senate? 50. Work-life balance. Work-life imbalance continues to be the #1 stressor for working women today. Heavy workloads and lack of flexibility at work create greater stress. Recruiting agencies all over the United States are doing surveys and research with regards to that, with regards to their ability to recruit good candidates for their companies. And they are finding that the work-life balance, we still are not there yet. Family leave became law in the 1990s, but less women are able to take family leave because of the gendered career paths. When women take family leave, they are frowned upon, and their careers tend to be put on hold. And whereas when men take family leave, they are supported in some, this is some of the new research that has come out. Now, this was just before COVID came in. We still now have other indicators with regards to working remotely and other indicators that have come from the post-COVID era, which we really haven't had enough time to study. But I think that these are some of the things that we need really to be looking at. The gender pay gap. More sustained progress needs to be closing the gender pay gap. And it may on deeper changes in societal and cultural norms and workplace flexibility. And again, I have to tell you about workplace flexibility. Again, when a woman takes a leave, she is frowned upon. When a man takes a leave, he is supported, and other people support him. So therefore, it becomes more difficult for women to be able, and to also reboot when they come back. Parenthood continues to drive a significant wage in the earnings of women and also men. So again, may have to do with the family leave or the inability to respond in now such an immediate world, because we have to respond to everything immediately. And if you're spending quality time with your children, you can't respond immediately. So therefore, it creates possibly a lag in your opportunity to ascend. Lack of affordable childcare. This is one that I cannot understand. In the 1960s, the Head Start program was to help children get to school earlier, so having them go through kindergarten, before kindergarten. And with that was also to help women get on the road to work. And so they're having children in a safe place through the Head Start pre-K program. We still don't have affordable childcare. It's hit and miss. It is patchwork, and waiting lists are phenomenal. And especially poor women, they cannot afford the kind of childcare. Even what is considered affordable, if you're only bringing home a few $100s a week, okay, to take out $300 or $400 a week for childcare is a lot of money. We have to solve this problem. And again, it's a what? Considered a what? A woman's issue. So therefore, we don't have the attention. We are sending money for our military. We spend money on tremendous amount. I'm not saying not to, but my gosh, we have so much money. We can be looking at women. Women are our first priority. And single parent households are on the rise. And without reliable childcare, that becomes a real problem. And so the 2020 census reflects within single parent families, most children, 15 million, live in mother-only child households. 6 million children live with cohabitating parents. They're not necessarily married, they're just together. And some of those, the woman is the major breadwinner. Okay. 3 to 4 million children live in father-only households, according to 2020 estimates. Among unmarried parents, the share of single mothers has shrunk in recent decades, while the share of cohabitating parents has grown. Statistics by race and ethnicity, and Black and American Indian children are the most likely to live in single-parent families, 64% of Black children and 52% of American Indian children. White and Asian Pacific Islanders are least likely, and 24% children and 15% Asian American children. Latino children and children who identify of 2 or more races fall somewhere in the middle, with 40% of those children living in single-parent families. So therefore what? We need to have what? Childcare and attention to low-cost quality childcare. We've made considerable progress in the fight to gain equal rights for women. However, we're still seeing inequality and disparities. And so women make 80 to 85% of what a white man makes, unequal 20% wage gap between men and women. Women wear the burden of low-wage jobs and unpaid caregiving. And now we found this sandwich generation in which women took care of children, and now they're taking care of their elders, because as people are living longer, they need to have and the responsibility comes on the women. This expectation. 1/3 of single mothers live in poverty. Older women make less money than their younger female employee counterparts on the same job with the same duties. This is phenomenal. Pew Research did a study on this, and nobody really knows why. Women are still victimized by sexual violence. 33% of women are likely to be sexually abused at one time in their life. 4.7 million American women experience physical violence by an intimate partner. Women in the US military are more likely to be raped by fellow soldiers than killed in combat. That is frightening. And so women are still underrepresented in leadership. 29% of the members of Congress, of the 50 state governors, 5 are women, a little over 8%. And of the Fortune 500 companies, 25 are led by women CEOs, less than 5%. And the biggest indignity is overturning Roe versus Wade, which allowed divided states to independently decide on the legal parameters and the funding to abortion care. And so that was as of June 2022. And so with that, yes, we still have a lot of work to do, don't you think? Okay, even though Equal Rights Amendment was written 100 years ago, let's start with that. We still haven't passed it. Okay, and research showed that although women make up half of our society, we are disproportionately impacted by lack of access to health care, quality life for our children, lack of access to quality education, lack of access to inspiring and empowering role models in STEM and political leadership, and yet continue to feel immense pressure to do it all. Remember, women can do it all. And so with that, I conclude my presentation, and I hope that you've learned something and have some questions. I hope you've got lots of questions. So thank you very much.
I'll ask if you would stay here. Again, would you please give a round of applause for Dr. Shea? Thank you for pointing out those trailblazers as well as how far we've come and how far we have to go. So I'm going to open this up to questions in the room. For those of you that are on Zoom, if you have a question, please drop that in the chat or use the raise hand feature and we will unmute you. For those of you in the room, please raise your hand so you can wait for a microphone so those that are on Zoom can hear your question. So while we're thinking of our questions, I'll start with one. As women progress up the ladder, they often find themselves as the only women in the room or one of very few women in the room. And I know that that is even more difficult of women of color. What would you say to those women that find themselves in these scenarios? In addition to, what would you say to the men in the room who will also be in those rooms where women feel either ignored or hyper visible, so that they could be allies to them?
Okay, well, first of all, I think that women need to find allies. They need to also find mentors. And they've got to find them. They really have to go out and search for mentors, not quasi-mentors, but real mentors. I think that that's one of the things in leadership that we have not taught women to be able to do, is to find mentors, because there aren't very many mentors in, let's say, C-suite, because you don't have access to those individuals. So we have to start creating our educational programs in order for people to be able to have access to those kind of mentors. We need to have classes on that, how to find a mentor. The other thing is being the only person in the room. Well, I've been the only person in the room almost all my life, okay? Dr. Majidi, who I know from many years ago, knows that for sure, right? Okay, and one of the things that I found with regards to doing that is don't listen to the chatter, just keep moving forward. Don't listen to the chatter. Just keep moving. If you know what's in your heart is right, it will happen. Okay? And don't sweat the small stuff. And continue to be an expert in your field. There's nothing that someone can say about you if you're an expert in your field. They may not like you. They may not like the way you wear your hair. But if you're an expert, they can't challenge you on that. Is that, how about any other questions? Yes.
Hello, and thank you for being here. We learned so much today. And one of the issues that I see, or the question that I might have, is it took us 100 years to be here. How can it not take us another 100 years to be where we want to be at parity and gender equality?
We need to become involved. Okay. You can't let George do it. Okay. Or Georgina do it. And you can't become involved peripherally. You need to become involved. These women became involved. They basically did what? They devoted 24/7 to what? To this. Now, you may not have that kind of time, but still being involved is very important. Okay. And too many times we are seeing that a lot of people want to be involved for the wrong reasons, not for the reasons for advancing equity, but for the reasons so that they are the ones that are going to be at the top. And then they do what? Forget everybody else around them. They do not create what? Career paths for others. So those are some of the reasons that are not necessarily productive for women's rights. These women live that model. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for this. This is really great. I really appreciate learning from you. Something that comes to mind is, I think as you're sharing the ways that women have kind of paved the path and even just the obstacles that we've overcome through the years, I think the emotion that comes up for me is kind of just this like being upset and kind of angry, you know, at the struggles that we've had and even still are facing today. And so I just wanted to ask, how have you maintained kind of more of a maybe level head as you're navigating as a woman, like as you're navigating these different topics and going kind of paving the way in this area?
Personally,
Yeah,
well,
or just in general.
I come from a different time. There are more support groups now than there were before, because when I was coming up, there was nobody in the room, and certainly no one that looked like me. All right. There was more support for African Americans because there were more African Americans in leadership at the time, but Latinas were very few and far between. And so therefore, and then there was interethnic conflict and all kinds of things. So I've been very fortunate. I think one of the best things that ever happened to me was I met my husband, and he just, I'd come back really, you know, and he said, just sit down and don't, you know, and he was basically the person that said, don't listen to all that chatter, just keep on going forward. So again, and you know, those are the people that you need to surround yourself with, people that are going to support you, people that aren't going to take, people that are worthy, trustworthy, and also that have a sound base of education and understanding. Because sometimes people can lead you down the path for their own, down a wrong path or a sidetrack, because they have their own agendas, right? So make sure that you have to get kind of in skills in order to be able to figure that out. So does that answer your question? But there are more support groups now.
So what's the cure for the imposter syndrome?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to introduce the Honorable Jan Perry, former city councilwoman. And she is responsible for the downtown redevelopment project. You notice downtown, how beautiful it is. Downtown, she took it from abandoned buildings downtown and made it a major thriving city like New York. Also, she did the wetlands project, which took a metro terminals. They weren't metro, they were old railroad yards that were in South Central LA. And she actually created green space for the citizens of South Central Los Angeles in order for them to have access to green space and park. And she used no taxpayer money, she used federal funds. So that's the kind of leaders you want to surround yourself with, people that are doers, and they don't go around blowing their own horn, they just do that. All right, the imposter syndrome. That's a hard one, because I talk to young women in their teens and in their 20s that feel imposter, even though they've done tremendous things, they feel imposter. They feel that they're there, they've been asked to do something, they've been asked to do a TED Talk, for God's sakes. And then they feel, well, I don't know anything about this. Well, somebody asked you because they thought you did. So, you know, you have to continue to build confidence. There were several, Norman Vincent Peale and many people from the past taught people how to build confidence in yourself. And one of them was basically getting up in the morning and standing in front of the mirror and saying, I am worthy. I am great. Okay. I know this better than anybody else. Okay. And that's where I went back and said, what? Be an expert in your field. because no one can challenge you when you have the answers. So the imposter is you really are an imposter because you don't know the answers. I always love it in a boardroom when there are men and women together, and a woman comes up with a terrific idea, and the men kind of gloss over the idea, and 5 minutes later, another man comes up with repeats what the woman has said, and everybody what? Oh, isn't that wonderful, right? Okay. Again, that's part of the imposter syndrome. It's part of the imposter syndrome because you actually let that happen. Okay. And the reason is you let that happen because you didn't say it loud enough and you didn't make people repeat it. Okay. So again, but again, you have to build that confidence, and that's just exercise. You can't be an athlete unless you do what? You can't run a marathon unless you what? Train, right? So you have to train.
In the chat, they asked, how do you go about addressing bias that you witnessed by an executive, or tell them without being construed as difficult?
Well, just face it, you're going to be construed as difficult, especially if you're women. Okay, all right. It depends on your relationship with that person. If he's a superior, be careful. Okay. If it is a person who is a peer, you may want to, go and have coffee and say, this is unacceptable. Please, limit your comments, or don't make comments like that about other women, things like that. Because you may also approach people by liability issues. We have so many liability issues now that I'm afraid that a lot of people are afraid to even come out of the door in the morning because there are liability issues. So maybe one way is to put a person and let them know that there could be liability issues attached to this, and it could get really messy. So for their own good, that's one way.
We have one more.
Okay.
So what plan does the Fulbright program have for expanding its reach and impact on promoting cross-cultural exchange and mutual understanding in the coming years?
Well, the Fulbright program is quite expansive. Actually the host countries, many of the host countries are actually giving more money to expand the research opportunities in their country and their expansion in those countries. So again, what is it I say? Apply, apply, apply if you're interested in a research opportunity. Anything else?
If I may.
Yes.
I actually don't have a question, but
Oh.
there are a few things I want to share with you. Carmen and I were classmates, and she had just met Gordon back then. This is how far back we go.
Long ago.
And I'm going to even make it worse. So the first time we worked together was at LA Southwest Community College, just down here. And then she hired me to put together a multimedia computer lab. CD-ROMs were brand new. Nobody had seen a moving picture on a computer screen until then. And we put that computer lab together so African-American and Latino kids could have access to the latest technology. I'm going to use a date, don't hate me. She was 6 years old in 1984. She held a conference. I was, at her wing. We hosted Nathaniel Brandon, the guru of self-esteem, to speak at that community college and address the issue of self-esteem among people of color. And that wasn't the term back then, people of color and women, to increase their self-esteem. So her work has always been at the forefront of what's out there, what's needed. And her vision has always been grand and supportive of everyone. So I wanted to acknowledge you for that.
Thank you, Dr. Virginia. Thank you, Barthene, my friend. We were in study groups together. So I can tell you that it really was something, because I walked into this community college and the president told me, well, I want you to do some things with the bilingual students, and I want, of course, I'm Latino. So of course, where are you headed? where do they want to put you? They want to put you with the Latino students. Well, my vision is always bigger because education is for whom? Everybody, okay? And so I said, well, I went to, at that time, the research office, which wasn't really a research office. And remember, we didn't have computers there really, all right? And they had these books with all the stats that came. And in these books, I looked at the transfer rate to Cal State, to UCLA. We had less than a 3% transfer rate, okay? And I went to the president and I said, is this true? How could this possibly be? I said, I got an idea. Let's create a transfer center. And he says, well, we don't have the money. I said, I don't care. I said, let's write a grant. And I wrote a grant for the U.S. Department of Education. And it became the Center for Retention and Transfer. I hired Dr. Majidi because he was an engineer at that time. And we needed people. People have tremendous amounts of math anxiety. And that's one of the big ones that people of color and women have, math anxiety. Don't know why. I think it's academically hereditary. It's not biologically hereditary, but it's academically. It's passed from one generation to the next academically. From again, you can't do it. He could do it, but you can't do it. And so Dr. Majidi, I said to him, Dr. Majidi, he wasn't doctor then. I said, Fartheen, we're going to create a transfer center, and I want you to go to UCLA, and I want you to see what they have at UCLA. All right, because you know computers and I know nothing about computers. So he and we set up an appointment with the vice chancellor at UCLA. And he went over there to UCLA and talked computer talk. And what did they have at UCLA? Right.
And we bought for the lab the full IBM. Back then was called AT and had
Right.
40 megabytes of hard disk.
That was big time, but that was big time. But UCLA didn't have what we ordered and what we had. So it was our vision, my vision, that's, I don't know computers, but that doesn't mean I can't find somebody that's going to help me with this. So I found Mark Farzine, and he was an engineer working right down the street, right off of Imperial at Hyperion. And I said, let's put this together. And we put this tremendous transfer center together, of which we did symposiums. We had, I think it was 3 students that were transferred to UCLA. The next year, we had 15 students go to UCLA. So partially because what? People were never directed, all right? This was at that time mostly African-American school. There were some Latino students, a small population, but that's what, and so it was, again, thinking outside of the box, being visionary, taking no for an answer, not an answer, okay? President says, you can't do this, we don't have any money, we'll find the money. Okay. So I get on the phone, I'm calling people, and there it happened. And it happened, okay? So here I am, folks. And if you need any resources, let me know. I'm happy to share.
Please give this trailblazer a round of applause. Thank you. And I'd like to thank her husband, Mr. Shea. Thank you for being here and for being a support and for showing that we all need some type of rock to lean on. So as you said, find a mentor, find a support, and take some action. And Honorable Perry, thank you so much for being here and for your work in this great city as well. So for those of you that are here, we invite you to stay and join the reception to meet Dr. Shea. Those of you that are on Zoom, we're going to drop a link in the chat if you will give us your feedback through that form. Those of you that are here, the feedback forms will be at the exit when you depart. So thank you for being here. A special thank you to Dr. Margaret J. Weber for your leadership, for your namesake, and for bringing a lecture like this to life with your inspiration. So to all of you, thank you. Please travel safe in this rain, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.